The chill of the stone floor seeped through the threadbare wool of her dress, a familiar and unwelcome cold that mirrored the ice in her mother's eyes. Elara knelt, her head bowed, the polished marble reflecting a distorted, waifish version of herself. Hunger was a dull, constant ache in her belly, a companion she had known for as long as she could remember. Her mother, Lady Seraphina, stood before the hearth, the firelight catching the cruel curve of her smile and the hard glitter of the jewels at her throat, jewels bought with the last of their family's coin, while Elara's stomach growled in the silence. "You are a disappointment, Elara." Her mother's voice was like the shatter of thin ice. "Weak, useless, a drain on a house that is already bleeding to death." Elara said nothing. There was nothing to say that she had not already tried saying, nothing that would not earn her a sharp slap or another day without a meal. She simply kept her eyes fixed on the floor, on the hazy reflection of the girl who was about to be sold. "However," Seraphina continued, turning from the fire, her silken robes whispering across the stone, "it seems even a broken tool can have its purpose." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. "I have secured our future. I have made a pact with the Shadowmir clan. We will have their gold, their protection. Our granaries will be full again." Elara's heart, a small, frightened bird in her chest, began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The Shadowmir clan. Their ruler was a monster of legend, a king spoken of only in hushed, terrified whispers. King Kael, the blind king. They said he was a beast trapped in a man's skin, that his rage could level mountains, and that his blindness only sharpened his other, more predatory senses. They said he took whatever and whoever he wanted. "What was the price?" Elara whispered, the words tasting of ash. Her mother's smile widened, a venomous, triumphant thing. "You, of course." She gestured dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "You will be sent to his court, a permanent guest, a tribute to seal our alliance, a tribute, a sacrifice, a lamb being led to a wolf's den." The cold in Elara's bones intensified until she was shaking with it. She was being traded for grain and gold, her life bartered away by the woman who should have protected her. A wave of bitter, helpless fury washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy, but it was extinguished as quickly as it came, drowned by the deep, familiar ocean of fear. The journey to the Shadowmir fortress was a blur of gray skies and skeletal trees. Elara was bundled into a carriage, given a new dress of dark, plain velvet that felt more like a burial shroud than a garment, and sent away without another word from her mother. She was nothing. A piece on a board, moved to save a queen who had long ago lost her crown. The fortress itself rose from the mountains like a shard of obsidian, a jagged silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. It was a place of stark, brutalist beauty, all sharp angles and towering walls that seemed to drink the light from the air. Wolves, massive gray and black beasts, with eyes that gleamed with unnerving intelligence, patrolled the battlements. They watched the carriage approach, their heads cocked, a low growl rumbling from their collective chests that vibrated through the very ground. Elara was escorted from the carriage by 2 guards, whose faces were grim masks carved from stone. They led her through enormous iron-wrought gates and into the great hall. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood smoke, pine and something else, something wild and musky and overwhelmingly powerful. It was the scent of the Alpha. The hall was vast, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, the walls lined with silent, watching warriors. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room feel alive and threatening. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne that looked as if it had been hewn from the heart of a mountain, sat the blind king. He was larger than she had imagined, a titan of a man with shoulders so broad they seemed to strain the dark tunic he wore. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, spilling over his shoulders in untamed waves. His face was all harsh lines and stark plains, a face built for war and command. And across his eyes, stark against his tanned skin, was a simple strip of black silk. He was utterly still, a predator waiting, his presence a palpable weight that pressed down on the entire hall, demanding silence, demanding obedience. Half-face. Elara's guards forced her to her knees, her velvet-clad legs hitting the cold flagstones with a soft thud that echoed in the cavernous silence. She was presented like an offering, her head bowed, her hands trembling in her lap. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but it was the unseen gaze of the man on the throne that burned her skin. A herald stepped forward, his voice nervously clearing the oppressive quiet. "Your Majesty, from the House of Eldoria, as per the treaty negotiated by her mother, the Lady Seraphina, we present the Lady, Elara." Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that stretched Elara's nerves to the breaking point. She dared not look up. She could hear the crackle of the torches, the faint shuffle of a warrior's boot, the frantic, panicked beat of her own heart. What did a blind man do to a tribute he could not see? Did he judge by scent? By the sound of her fear? Then he moved. The sound was subtle, the scrape of a boot on stone as he rose from his throne. The air in the room shifted, growing heavier, charged with a sudden electric tension. He descended the dais, his steps slow, deliberate, and utterly silent. He was a shadow moving through shadows, and he stopped directly in front of her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the primal scent of him, pine, winter air, and pure, undiluted power. A large hand, calloused and warm, reached out and cupped her chin. His touch was surprisingly gentle, yet it held an undeniable strength that sent a tremor through her entire body. He tilted her head up, forcing her to face him, to face the black silk that covered his eyes. Her breath hitched. His proximity was overwhelming, a visceral assault on her senses. His wolf, she knew, was there, just beneath the surface, ancient and powerful and assessing her. And then she felt it. A jolt. Not of fear, but of something else. A searing, inexplicable connection that arced between them, a silent thunderclap in the core of her soul. It was like a string had been tied to her heart her entire life, and in that moment, the other end had been pulled taut. A visceral, shocking recognition passed through her, though she could not name what it was. Her soul cried out in a language she did not understand. He went utterly still. His hand tightened on her chin, his thumb stroking softly over her jawline. A low sound escaped his throat, a deep, guttural growl that was not entirely human. It vibrated through her, a sound of profound, animalistic shock, of discovery, of possession. Mine. The word was a ghost of a sound, a breath of smoke in the cold air, meant only for him. But Elara heard it. She felt it. He released her chin and reached up, his fingers brushing the edge of the silk band across his eyes. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. He did not remove it. Instead, his voice, when it came, was a low, resonant timbre that owned the silence, a king's voice imbued with absolute authority. "The world believes my eyes are shrouded in darkness, he said, his voice a quiet storm. He took a step back, his unseen gaze still locked on her, pinning her in place more effectively than any physical restraint. Yet from the moment you entered my hall, you are the only thing I have ever truly seen. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled warriors. Whispers erupted like wildfire. He could see? What did he mean? Elara's mind reeled, the impossible words echoing in the sudden chaos of her thoughts. He saw her. Not just her physical form kneeling on the floor, but her. The broken, starving girl hiding inside. The flicker of a soul she thought no one would ever notice. The blind king saw it all. He raised a hand, and the hall fell silent once more. His command was absolute, unquestioned. His attention returned solely to her, a palpable, focused force. "Take her to my chambers," he commanded the guards, his voice leaving no room for argument. "See that she is bathed and fed. No one is to disturb her, no one." He turned his head slightly, in the direction where Elara knew his beta, a grim-faced wolf named Gideon, stood. "Send Lady Seraphina's envoy away. Tell her the tribute is accepted. The treaty is void. Her daughter belongs to me now. The price has been paid in full." Elara was lifted to her feet, her legs unsteady. As the guards led her away, she looked back over her shoulder. King Kael had not moved. He stood at the foot of his throne, a solitary, powerful figure, his head turned toward her, tracking her departure. And she knew with a certainty that defied all logic, that even with 100 yards and a wall of warriors between them, his eyes were still on her. He was still seeing her. The thought was more terrifying and more thrilling than anything she had ever known. The king's chambers were a world away from the cold, damp room she had occupied her entire life. They were a vast expanse of dark wood, rich furs, and burnished metal. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. A massive bed, piled high with black wolf pelts and dark silks, dominated one wall. It was a space that was unapologetically masculine, a den for the apex predator who ruled these lands. And now it was her gilded cage. Servants, their eyes downcast, and their movements silent and efficient, drew a steaming bath for her in an adjoining room. The water was scented with herbs that smelled of the forest, of pine and something floral and wild. They laid out a nightgown of the softest silk, the color of cream, and a robe of thick, dark fur. The food they brought was a feast: roasted chicken, fresh bread still warm from the oven, sweet butter, cheese, and a goblet of spiced wine. It was more food than she had seen in a month. She ate until her stomach ached, a pleasant, unfamiliar sensation. She bathed until the grime and despair of her old life felt washed away, leaving her skin clean and flushed. But as she sat by the fire, wrapped in the heavy fur robe, the luxury of her surroundings did little to soothe the frantic fluttering of her heart. She was a prisoner here, albeit a well-fed and comfortable one. A prisoner of a king who spoke in riddles and saw with eyes that were bound in shadow. What did he see when he looked at her? Why had his wolf, his very soul, seemed to recognize her? That feeling, that searing jolt of connection, lingered within her, a low hum of energy she couldn't explain. It was frightening, but it was also the first time in her life she had ever felt significant, seen. Hours passed. The fortress fell quiet. The guards outside her door were a silent, unmoving presence. Elara's fear began to curdle into a strange, restless anxiety. She paced the room, the plush carpets silencing her footfalls. She was waiting for him, the king, her new master. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that was not entirely from fear. When he finally entered, it was without a sound. The heavy wooden door swung open and closed, and he was simply there, a larger, darker shadow in the fire-lit room. He had shed his formal tunic for a simpler, dark shirt and trousers that did nothing to conceal the formidable muscle beneath. The black silk was still tied across his eyes. He stood by the door, his head tilted as if listening, sensing the space. "You are afraid," he stated. It was not a question. Elara stopped pacing, her heart leaping into her throat. "You are the blind king," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Legends are told of you. They are not kind legends." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "My enemies do not speak of me with kindness. It is true. But you are not my enemy." He moved further into the room, his steps confident and sure, navigating the space as if he could see every piece of furniture perfectly. He stopped before the hearth, turning his body to face the flames, the firelight playing over the hard planes of his face. "My eyes were destroyed in a battle long ago," he said, his voice softer now, devoid of the ringing authority it held in the throne room. "I see no light, no color, no shape as you do. But my wolf sees. He sees the heat of a body, the scent of a soul. He sees the truth of things. Most people are pale, flickering candles in the darkness. Muted. Gray." He turned his head, and though she could not see his eyes, she felt his focus settle on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You," he breathed, the word full of a raw, aching wonder. "You are a bonfire, a blinding, searing sun in the endless night. My wolf has been howling for you since the moment you came through my gates." Elara stared at him, speechless. A sun? Her? She was a guttering flame, a spark away from being extinguished entirely. I don't understand." "You are my mate," he said simply, as if stating a fact as fundamental as the rising of the moon. "The other half of my soul, the one my blood and my wolf were born to find." The word hung in the air between them. Mate. She had heard the stories. A bond of destiny, unbreakable, absolute. A connection so profound it forged two souls into one. It was a thing of myth and song, something that happened to powerful alphas and their chosen females, not to discarded, broken things like her. "That's impossible," she whispered, shaking her head. "I am no one, a weakling from a fallen house. My mother—" "Your mother is a fool," Kael interrupted, his voice hardening, a dangerous edge creeping back into it. "She had a treasure in her hands and tried to trade it for pebbles. She saw your flickering reflection in a puddle and never thought to look up at the star that cast it." He took a step toward her, then another. "She did not see your true nature, but I do." He reached her, his large frame blocking the firelight, casting her in his shadow. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently take a lock of her simple brown hair between his thumb and forefinger. He brought it to his nose, inhaling deeply. A shudder went through him. "There is a power in you, Elara," he murmured, his voice thick with a strange reverence. "Dormant, bound. But it is there. A light sleeping in the dark. It is the reason your soul burns so brightly. It is what my wolf recognized. Before she could process his words, an old woman entered the chambers, led in by the guards without a word. She was wizened and bent, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She carried a small leather satchel and moved with a quiet authority that even the king seemed to respect. "Maeve," Kael said, stepping back from Elara but not moving far. "My king." The old woman, Maeve, bowed her head slightly. Her gaze fell upon Elara, and her sharp eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She walked closer, peering at Elara not as a person, but as a puzzle. "It is true, then. The scent on the air. It has not been known in these lands for 500 years. "Show me," Kael commanded softly. Maeve nodded. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, smooth crystal that pulsed with a faint, internal light. "Hold this, child," she instructed Elara, her voice surprisingly gentle. Hesitantly, Elara took the crystal. The moment her skin touched its cool surface, it flared with a brilliant golden light, so bright it filled the entire room, making the fire in the hearth seem dim. The light was warm, comforting, and it seemed to sing from the very core of her being. Elara gasped and dropped it, and the light instantly vanished. Maeve looked from the crystal to the king, her expression one of profound awe. "She is a luminary," the healer breathed, "a daughter of the sun-blessed line. They were thought to have been wiped out during the Shadow Wars. Their light is the perfect balance to the Shadowmir blood, a power that can heal the land, soothe the feral rage of the wolf, an anchor for a king's soul." Kael's jaw was tight, his fists clenched at his sides. He was radiating a storm of emotions, possessive fury, protective instinct, and a deep, soul-shaking relief. "Her mother must have known," he growled. "She must have bound it, suppressed it, to keep her hidden, to keep her weak." It all crashed down on Elara at once. The searing connection, the king's impossible words, the glowing crystal, a luminary, a hidden power. Her entire life had been a lie, a carefully constructed cage not just of poverty and neglect, but of magical suppression. Her mother hadn't just starved her body, she had starved her soul, keeping her from a power, a heritage that was rightfully hers. Why? To control her? To make her an easy pawn in her pathetic games for power? The incomplete bond with the king was a constant, thrumming presence beneath her skin. In the days that followed, it became both a comfort and a torment. It was a low, steady warmth that assured her she was no longer alone, but it also came with sharp, unexpected stabs of emotion that were not her own. She would be sitting by the window, watching the snow fall on the fortress courtyard, and suddenly be hit with a wave of crushing responsibility, the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. Or she would be trying to sleep, and a jolt of fierce, predatory rage would shoot through her, making her sit bolt upright, her heart pounding. It was his anger, his burden, bleeding through their frayed connection. The pain was worse for him. She knew it instinctively. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would feel a spike of raw agony from him, so sharp and visceral it made her gasp for breath. It was the feeling of being torn, of a soul split in two, yearning to be whole. The incomplete bond was slowly driving his wolf mad, and her presence was the only thing that kept it leashed. Kael was a constant, brooding presence. He spent hours with her in his chambers, sometimes sitting in silence for an entire evening, simply being near her. He explained that his sight was a form of extrasensory perception, a combination of his wolf's instincts and the magic in his blood. He saw emotions as colors, life forces as heat, and souls as flames. Her soul, he told her again, was the only thing that had ever broken through the gray, shadowy world he inhabited. He taught her about their world, about the politics of the pacts, the ancient bloodlines, and the enemies that circled his kingdom. One name came up more than any other: Lord Vanthorn, a proud, ambitious alpha from the southern territories, whose house had long been a rival to the Shadowmir clan. "He will see you as a weakness," Kael warned her one night, his voice a low growl as he stood staring out the window, his back to her. "A low-born mate from a disgraced house. He will use you to challenge my rule." His words proved prophetic. A week later, Kael was summoned to a full meeting of his council. He insisted Elara accompany him. "They need to see you," he had said, his hand possessively on the small of her back. "They need to know you are their queen." Walking into the council chamber on his arm felt like walking into a pit of wolves. The room was circular, dominated by a massive stone table. The alphas of the vassal pacts were assembled, powerful men and women whose gazes were sharp and assessing. At the head of the table, opposite the king's seat, sat a man with silver-streaked hair and cold, calculating eyes. Lord Vanthorn. The moment Vanthorn's eyes landed on Elara, a sneer twisted his lips. "So this is the prize that has distracted our king," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A little stray from the gutter. Is this to be our queen, Kael? A girl whose mother sold her for a sack of coin?" A murderous rage, black and absolute, erupted from Kael. It was not just an emotion, it was a physical force, a wave of palpable power that slammed into the room, making the very stones vibrate. The torches flickered wildly, and the other alphas flinched back, their faces paling. Elara felt the fury hit her through the bond, a searing white-hot agony that threatened to overwhelm her. It was his wolf, raw and untamed, ready to tear Vanthorn apart for the insult. She cried out, not in fear, but in pain from the backlash of his emotion. Her hand flew to her chest, trying to breathe through the sudden onslaught. He was going to lose control. He was going to kill Vanthorn and plunge the kingdom into civil war. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she reached out. Not with her hands, but with her mind. With the core of her being. She focused on the bond, that shimmering, painful thread that connected them, and she poured every ounce of her will into it. A desperate, silent plea. "Calm. I am here. Be calm." A soft, golden light, invisible to every eye but Kael's, bloomed from her chest. It was the faintest of glows in his world of shadow, but to him it was like a sunrise. The light flowed down the bond between them, a soothing, warm wave that washed over the raging inferno of his wolf. Kael flinched, his head snapping toward her. The suffocating pressure in the room receded instantly. The rage in his soul was not gone, but it was contained, leashed, soothed by a power he had never felt before. He stared in her direction, his expression hidden behind the silk, but she could feel his shock, his awe through their connection. Lord Vanthorn, oblivious to the silent, supernatural battle that had just taken place, saw only that the king's killing intent had vanished. He mistook it for weakness. "Has your little pet tamed you then?" he sneered. Kael's voice, when he replied, was deadly calm. It was the quiet of a storm's eye, more terrifying than any shout. "Lord Vanthorn," he said slowly, "you will address your queen with the respect she is due, or I will strip you of your title, your lands, and your head, in that order." He did not wait for a reply. He pulled Elara's chair out for her, seating her beside him at the head of the table. "The council will now begin." The rest of the meeting was a tense affair, but no one dared challenge the king again. Vanthorn sat in simmering, resentful silence. Elara, however, was reeling. She had done that. She had touched his rage, his very soul, and calmed it. The dormant power Maeve had spoken of was real. It was in her. Later that night, back in the safety of their chambers, Kael finally broke his silence. He stood before her, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire room. For the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain, vulnerable. "What you did in there," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "No one has ever been able to leash my wolf when his blood is up. Not even me. It is a fire that consumes everything." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment, before he gently, reverently, touched her cheek. "Your light." It was like cool water on a forge fire. It did not extinguish it. It tempered it. The admission was a crack in his formidable armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the monstrous king. He was afraid of his own power, of the beast that lived inside him. The pain of their incomplete bond frayed his control, and he feared what he might become if it broke entirely. "I am terrified of losing you," he confessed, the words torn from him, a raw and painful whisper. "Before you, there was only duty and darkness, a long gray road to the grave. You have shown me the sun, Elara. To be plunged back into the night now would be a hell I could not endure." His vulnerability was more potent than any display of power. It shattered the last of her fear, replacing it with a fierce, protective ache in her own chest. This powerful king, this feared alpha, needed her. Her, the girl who had been told her entire life that she was worthless. She leaned into his touch, her hand coming up to cover his. "You won't lose me," she promised, her voice shaking but firm. "We are two halves of a whole, remember?" A shudder racked his frame, and he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. His embrace was not crushing, but it was absolute, a desperate holding on. "I have a kingdom at my feet," he murmured against her scalp. "Tonight, I lay it at yours." He held her for a long time, and in the circle of his arms, surrounded by his power and his pain, Elara felt the first true stirrings of what it meant to be a queen, and what it meant to love a king. Their fragile peace was shattered less than a week later. Word arrived that Lord Vanthorn's pack was massing on the northern border, a clear provocation. It was a challenge Kael could not ignore. He had to ride out with his warriors to meet the threat, to force Vanthorn to stand down before it escalated into open war. "It is a distraction," Elara insisted, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach as she watched him strap on his leather armor. "Vanthorn is not brave enough to face you in open battle. He is pulling you away from the fortress. From me." "I know," Kael said, his voice grim. He turned and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. The physical distance would be agony for their incomplete bond, he knew. "But it is a challenge I must answer, or the other alphas will see it as weakness. I will be back before the next full moon. I will leave Gideon and a full contingent of the Royal Guard. You will be the most well-protected person in this kingdom." He kissed her then, a desperate, claiming kiss that spoke of his fear of leaving and his promise to return. The moment he rode out of the fortress gates, a profound sense of loss and isolation washed over her. The bond stretched thin, a taut wire humming with anxiety and distance. The warmth of his presence was gone, leaving a phantom chill in its place. She tried to keep busy, studying the kingdom's histories with Maeve, learning about her luminary heritage. The healer taught her simple focusing exercises, helping her to call upon the faint, warm light within her at will. It was a small, gentle power, nothing like the blaze Kael described seeing, but it was hers. The first few days passed in a tense quiet. But Elara's sense of foreboding only grew. The fortress, which had started to feel like a home, now felt like a trap once more. The shadows seemed longer, the silence heavier. She was right. It had all been a diversion. The true threat was not on the border. It was already inside the walls. The attack came on the 5th night, under the cloak of a new moon and a raging blizzard. They did not come over the walls. Her mother was far more subtle than that. She had used the gold Kael had paid for the voided treaty to bribe a handful of servants, to buy the loyalty of a captain of the Day Watch. They opened a small, forgotten postern gate in the oldest part of the fortress. The intruders were not soldiers. They were wraiths, men and women clad in black leather that seemed to absorb the torchlight, their faces obscured by shadows. Shadow weavers. Mercenaries who practiced a dark, parasitic magic, the antithesis of Elara's own. The royal guard fought valiantly, but they were unprepared for this kind of enemy. The shadow weavers moved like smoke, their blades coated in a poison that deadened the senses and stole a shifter's strength. The clash of steel and the shouts of men were muffled by the thick, falling snow. Gideon, the formidable Beta, reached her chambers just moments before the attackers. His face was pale, a dark gash bleeding freely on his temple. "My queen, we are betrayed. You must run." But there was nowhere to run. The shadow weavers were already pouring into the royal wing. At their head was a figure Elara recognized with a gut-wrenching lurch of her stomach. Her mother. Lady Seraphina stood there, no longer the faded aristocrat from a fallen house, but a woman alight with triumphant malice. Her eyes glittered with a cold, greedy fire. "Did you really think I would let you keep it all?" Seraphina sneered, her voice cutting through the sounds of the fight. "That power you hold belongs to our bloodline. It belongs to me. I simply stored it in you for safekeeping." "You bound my powers," Elara whispered, the betrayal a fresh, gaping wound. "You made me weak." "I made you invisible," her mother corrected her sharply. "A necessary precaution. But now your king has awakened you. He has made you valuable, and I have come to collect my investment." Gideon moved to stand between them, his sword at the ready, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You will not touch her." Seraphina laughed, a sound like grinding glass. She gestured, and 2 of her weavers lunged forward. They did not attack Gideon with steel, but with tendrils of pure shadow that erupted from their hands. The tendrils wrapped around the Beta, constricting, sapping his strength. He roared in defiance, but his wolf's power was being smothered, drowned in the cloying darkness. He fell to one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elara was frozen in terror. This was her fault. Kael was gone because of her. Gideon was dying because of her. Her mother was going to take her, to steal this nascent power, and she would be plunged back into a darkness far worse than any she had ever known. No. The thought was a spark in the overwhelming fear. No, she was not that helpless girl anymore. She was the mate of the Alpha King. She was a luminary. She was a queen, cornered, with her protector falling and her tormentor advancing, a primal instinct for survival took over. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of her mother's triumphant face, and reached inside herself. She sought that small, warm flame she had been practicing with, that gentle light. But it wasn't a gentle warmth she found. It was a furnace. The terror and the rage she felt acted as a bellows, stoking the embers into a roaring inferno. She opened her eyes and threw her hands forward. It was not a conscious act, but a desperate, instinctual one. A shield of brilliant golden light erupted from her, a solid wall of energy that slammed into the two shadow weavers attacking Gideon. They shrieked as the pure light touched them, their shadow magic dissolving like smoke in a hurricane. They were thrown back, their bodies hitting the stone wall with sickening force, their dark magic utterly annihilated. The light shield flickered around her, a dome of shimmering gold. It was a raw, untamed expression of her power, and it took all of her concentration to hold it. Her mother stared, her greed warring with shock. "So, the little bird has claws after all," Seraphina hissed. She drew a wicked-looking dagger from her belt, its blade a dull, matte black that seemed to drink the light. A cursed blade. "It doesn't matter. I have spent years studying how to break our bloodline, how to take its power. I bound you once, child. I can do it again." Seraphina advanced on the shield, the dark blade held before her. The cursed metal began to hiss and sizzle as it touched the golden light, the shield groaning and cracking under the strain. Elara cried out, the effort of maintaining the barrier against such a potent dark artifact, sending needles of pain through her skull. She was weakening. The light flickered, threatening to die. She could not hold it much longer. Through the bond, across miles of snow-swept wilderness, Kael felt it. One moment, he was feeling the dull ache of their separation, the constant, low-grade anxiety. The next, a spike of pure, unadulterated terror lanced through him, so sharp and clear it nearly threw him from his saddle. It was Elara's fear. It was a psychic scream that echoed in the deepest parts of his soul. "She is in danger," he roared, his voice inhuman. His warriors, startled, looked at him as his entire demeanor changed. The calm, strategic king was gone, replaced by the feral alpha. His eyes, were they visible, would have been glowing with molten gold. "The fortress is under attack! Van Thorn was a feint!" He wheeled his horse around, not even bothering to give orders. His men knew. They were bound to him, to his will. They followed without question, their own wolves rising in response to their alpha's distress. They galloped through the blizzard, a force of nature chasing the storm, their only thought to return to their besieged home, to their queen. But it was too far. He would be too late. The thought was a shard of ice in his heart. He pushed his mount harder, the wind whipping at him, but the terror coming through the bond was escalating, twisting into desperation and pain. He could feel her power. A faint golden thread across the distance, flaring brightly and then starting to fade. She was fighting, and she was losing. The golden shield shattered. The force of it threw Elara backward onto the cold stone floor. The breath knocked from her lungs. Her mother stood over her, the cursed dagger raised, a triumphant, ugly smile on her face. Gideon was unconscious, the shadow magic having taken its toll. She was alone. "Such a waste," Seraphina lamented, though her eyes danced with glee. She crouched down, grabbing a fistful of Elara's hair and yanking her head back, exposing her throat. "But your power will serve a greater purpose in me." The tip of the dagger was ice cold against Elara's skin. This was it. This was the end. She had found her mate, discovered her power, only to have it all stolen away by the very person who should have cherished her. A wave of profound, soul-deep despair washed over her. She thought of Kael. She sent every ounce of her love, her sorrow, her being, down the bond to him. A final goodbye, and then she heard it. A howl. It was not the howl of a normal wolf. It was a sound that shook the foundations of the fortress. A sound of pure, untamed rage and territorial fury. It was the sound of a king returning to his kingdom to find it defiled. The great doors to the royal wing burst inward, ripped from their hinges as if they were made of parchment, and in the doorway stood a beast of nightmare and legend. Kael. He was no longer in his human form. He had given himself over to the wolf entirely. He was colossal, a dire wolf the size of a horse, his fur the color of midnight, his lips pulled back from teeth like daggers, and his eyes were open. They were not the ruined, scarred pits of a blind man. They were two burning orbs of molten gold, glowing with an inner, feral light. He could see, and all he saw was the threat to his mate. With a roar that was part wolf, part god of war, he launched himself into the room. He was a blur of black fur and righteous fury. The remaining shadow weavers had no time to react. He tore through them, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, his rage absolute and his justice swift. He was not just killing them, he was annihilating them, their dark magic nothing against the primal power of a fully transformed Alpha King. Seraphina scrambled back from Elara, her face a mask of shock and fear. The beast she had heard of in legends was real, and it was here. She held the cursed dagger up, a pathetic ward against the storm she had unleashed. Kael, in his wolf form, ignored her for a moment. He stalked toward Elara, his massive head lowering to nudge her, his golden eyes scanning her for injury. A low, pained whine rumbled in his chest. He was too late. He had let her be harmed. Seeing his momentary distraction, Seraphina saw her chance. With a cry of desperation, she lunged not at the king, but at Elara. If she could not have the power, she would destroy its vessel. Seeing the dagger arc down toward her, something inside Elara did not just break. It vaporized. The despair, the fear, the love for the Beast King before her, the betrayal of the woman attacking her. It all coalesced into a single, critical point of pressure. The dormant furnace within her exploded. It was not a shield this time. It was a nova. A silent, unstoppable wave of pure, white gold light erupted from her body. It was not a gentle warmth. It was a visceral, cleansing fire. The light slammed into her mother, and Seraphina screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut short as the luminary power scoured the darkness from her soul, breaking her connection to shadow magic, breaking her will, breaking her. She collapsed, unconscious, the cursed dagger melting into a puddle of slag before it hit the floor. The wave of light washed over Kael, but it did not harm him. It passed through him, healing the minor wounds he had sustained, soothing the feral rage of his wolf, and anchoring his spirit. It filled the entire hall, pouring out into the courtyard, a beacon of dawn in the heart of the blizzard. Every shadow in the fortress was banished, every trace of dark magic eradicated. Elara stood, or rather floated, an inch off the ground, the center of the blinding radiance. Her hair was lifted around her head like a halo, her eyes glowing with the same white gold power. She was no longer a frightened girl or a budding queen. She was a force of nature, fully awakened, a true luminary. But the power was too much. It had been bound for too long, and its sudden release threatened to consume her, to burn her up from the inside out. She felt her consciousness fraying, her body becoming pure energy. She was losing herself to the light. Kael, feeling her distress through the bond, acted instantly. He pushed himself forward, into the heart of the radiance, and did the one thing that could save her. He pressed his massive, furry head against her chest, right over her heart, and anchored her. He poured his own essence, the deep, grounding shadow and earth of his bloodline, into her through their connection. He was the darkness to her light, the mountain to her sky. Together, they found their balance. Slowly, the blinding light began to recede, coalescing back into her. She sank gently to the floor, the immense power settling within her, no longer a raging storm, but a deep, powerful ocean tamed and under her command. She collapsed, exhausted but whole, into the soft fur of the great wolf who had saved her. He curled his enormous body around her, a living shield of warmth and protection, and laid his head over her, his glowing golden eyes watching over her as she finally succumbed to a healing sleep. When Elara awoke, it was to the soft crackle of a fire and the weight of a heavy fur blanket over her. She was in the king's bed, the great wolf pelts a comforting warmth against her skin. The blizzard had passed, and pale morning light streamed through the high arched windows. The fortress was quiet, a peaceful silence that felt earned. Kael sat in a chair by the bed. He was back in his human form, dressed simply in trousers, his chest bare and bandaged in several places. The black silk was gone. His eyes were open, and he was watching her. They were the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen, the color of molten gold, flecked with amber and bronze. They were also latticed with fine, silvery scars, a testament to the injury that had stolen his mortal sight. But they were not blind. They saw her, truly and completely. "You're awake," he said, his voice soft, full of a deep and profound relief. "My mother," she began, her own voice raspy, "is in the deepest cell of the dungeons," he finished for her. "Her magic is broken. She is just a bitter, powerless woman now. She will never harm you again." He leaned forward, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm and steady. "Gideon will make a full recovery. Maeve is tending to him. My warriors have secured the fortress. It's over." She looked into his golden eyes, seeing the raw emotion there. Love, awe, a devotion so absolute it stole her breath. "Your eyes," she whispered. "You let the wolf take over completely." He nodded. "It is the only time I can truly see with them. When the beast is ascendant, his sight becomes mine. But it is a dangerous state. I lose myself to it. Last night, I would have torn down my own fortress to get to you. It was your light that brought me back from the brink." She had saved him, and he had saved her. They were a perfect, terrifying, beautiful balance. All the pain, all the fear, had led them to this single, perfect moment of understanding. The bond between them was no longer a frayed, aching connection. It was a solid, thrumming cable of light and shadow, a complete and unbreakable circuit. All that was left was the final seal. "Claim me, Kael," she whispered, the words holding no fear, only certainty. "Make it whole." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, transforming his harsh features into something breathtaking. He rose and came to the bed, lying down beside her, pulling her gently into his arms. Elara of the Luminary line, last daughter of the sun, he murmured, his voice thick with reverence as he buried his face in the crook of her neck. My mate, my queen, my anchor, he bit down. Not a savage, tearing bite, but a firm, possessive claiming. His teeth pierced the delicate skin where her neck met her shoulder, and a jolt of pure energy, white-hot and ecstatic, shot through her. It was not pain, it was completion. His magic, his soul, his very essence poured into her, and her own light rushed to meet it. Their minds touched, their memories merging, their pasts and futures intertwining into a single, shared existence. The bond snapped into its final, perfect place. They were one. Months later, Queen Elara stood on the battlements of the Shadowmir fortress, King Kael's arms wrapped securely around her from behind. His chin rested on her shoulder, and his scarred but seeing golden eyes watched the land with her. The kingdom was thriving. Under the joint influence of their shadow and light, the long-blighted lands were healing. New growth was everywhere, lush and green. His people who had once feared their grim, blind king now loved him, for his queen had taught him how to temper his power with compassion. Elara was no longer the frail, starving girl who had knelt in this hall. She was a confident and beloved queen, her luminary power a steady, reassuring warmth that could be felt throughout the kingdom. She rested a hand on her gently swelling abdomen, a smile gracing her lips. The next generation of their line, a child of both shadow and light, was on its way. "What do you see?" Kael murmured in her ear, his hand coming to rest over hers on their unborn child. She turned her head, her lips brushing his. "I see our home," she answered, her voice full of a peace she had never dreamed possible. "I see our future, and I see you." He smiled, the smile that was only ever for her, and kissed her deeply. In the heart of the Shadowmir lands, the blind king and his luminary queen had brought the dawn, and their reign, they knew, was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.